The Australian outback is vast, silent, and unforgiving, a place where a single step off the trail can mean vanishing without a trace. For 4-year-old Gus Lamont, it was supposed to be just another afternoon playing outside his grandparents' home near Yunta. But sometime between the laughter and the fading daylight, Gus disappeared, leaving behind a family torn apart and a mystery that has shaken South Australia to its core. Search teams combed through 470 square kilometers of rugged terrain, aided by drones, dogs, and defense forces. Every dry creek bed, every abandoned shed, every patch of scrub was searched again and again. Yet, no shoe prints, no clothing, no trace of little Gus was ever found. The desert swallowed him whole, and with every passing day, hope began to fade. But what makes this tragedy even more devastating is what was happening behind the scenes. While the world focused on the massive search, few knew that Gus's father, Joshua Lamont, had spent years rebuilding a small cottage in Jamestown, a place he dreamed would finally bring his family back together. He was just weeks away from finishing it when Gus vanished. Tonight, we explore not only the disappearance of a child, but the collapse of a father's dream, and the unanswered questions that continue to haunt an entire community. Was this a tragic accident in the unforgiving outback? Or could there be a darker truth hidden beneath the red dust of Yunta? This is the Gus Lamont Case update, the hidden family secret that makes this tragedy even more heartbreaking. It began like any other spring afternoon in the Australian outback. The heat lingered over the red earth, cicadas buzzed in the distance, and 4-year-old Gus Lamont played happily on a mound of dirt near his grandparents' remote property south of Yunta. Inside the homestead, his grandmother Shannon Murray watched over Gus's baby brother, Ronnie, while preparing dinner as the sun slowly dipped beyond the horizon. At approximately 5:30 p.m., Shannon stepped outside to call Gus in for dinner. But the spot where he had been playing just moments earlier was empty. There were no footprints leading away, no signs of struggle, not even a small toy left behind. Panic set in almost immediately. Shannon searched the yard, calling his name into the vast silence, a silence that stretched for kilometers in every direction. When her calls went unanswered, she contacted her daughter, Jessica Murray, Gus's mother, who was tending to the sheep with her partner, Josie, about 10 kilometers away. Within minutes, they rushed back to the property. As night fell over the outback, fear began to replace hope. By 8:30 p.m., the family called the police and reported Gus missing. The first responders arrived before midnight. Flashlights cut through the darkness as officers and locals scoured every corner of the property. They checked water tanks, sheds, and fences. Nothing. The desert was eerily still, the temperature dropping sharply as the night deepened. By dawn, dozens of emergency service members joined the search, marking the beginning of one of South Australia's largest search operations in years. Over the next several days, more than 100 personnel from South Australia Police, the State Emergency Service, and the Australian Defence Force descended upon Yunta. Helicopters circled overhead, equipped with heat sensors. Drones mapped the terrain. On the ground, searchers walked shoulder to shoulder, combing through saltbush and creek beds, calling out the boy's name over and over again. By day 3, the search area had expanded to over 95 square kilometers. Crews fought scorching temperatures, dehydration, and exhaustion. But despite the massive scale, there was no sign, no clothing, no tracks, no personal belongings. It was as though the little boy had simply vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, investigators began interviewing family members. Gus had been living at the Yunta homestead with his mother Jess and two grandmothers, Shannon and Josie Murray. His father, Joshua Lamont, lived in Jamestown, roughly 200 kilometers away. He wasn't present at the property that day. Police woke him at his home during the night to deliver the devastating news. According to friends, Joshua had been preparing for months to bring his young family back together. He had spent years renovating a small 2-bedroom cottage on the outskirts of Jamestown, a modest project house he purchased in 2021, just after Gus was born. The plan was simple. Once complete, Jess and the two boys would move in, starting fresh under one roof. The home sat on 10 acres of dry rural land. When he first bought it, the walls were cracked, the floors uneven, and the plumbing barely functional. Joshua wasn't a tradesman, but he worked long hours fixing it himself, patching walls, repairing windows, and recently, rebuilding the bathroom. Neighbors often saw him working late into the night, radio on, tools scattered across the porch. He told a neighbor he was counting down the months until Gus started school. He even began looking at schools nearby, considering both Jamestown and Peterborough. His dream was to give Gus the kind of normal, steady life that had been missing through years of separation and family tension. But that dream ended the moment the police knocked on his door. He hadn't seen Gus in days, and now, his little boy was gone without a trace. Friends described him as devastated and numb, a man who had poured every ounce of energy into creating a home his son would never live in. As the search entered its second week, authorities expanded the perimeter to 470 square kilometers, an area roughly the size of 100 city centers. The terrain was harsh and dangerous. Open plains, deep creeks, rocky hills, and thick scrub. Temperatures soared past 35 degrees Celsius during the day, dropping below 10 degrees Celsius at night. For a child so young, survival beyond a few days seemed impossible. Despite that grim reality, churches refused to give up. Volunteers from neighboring towns drove hours to help. Farmers lent vehicles, pilots flew private aircraft overhead. Still, day after day, the result was the same: nothing. Not even a footprint. Investigators examined every possible scenario. Could Gus have wandered off and become lost? Was there a hidden well or sinkhole nearby? Or, the unspoken fear, had someone taken him? But without physical evidence, every theory was speculation. Police Commissioner Grant Stevens told reporters that the family had fully cooperated with the investigation. There were no suspects, no criminal indicators, and no evidence of foul play. "This is about exhausting every possibility," he said. "We have nothing to suggest wrongdoing, but we must consider every scenario." As the days passed, the focus began to shift from rescue to recovery. On October 17th, police officially announced that the active search would wind down. After 19 days, the operation had found no sign of Gus. Officers described the family as stoic but shattered, still clinging to hope against all odds. Behind the scenes, Joshua Lamont stopped returning to his renovation project. The tools sat untouched, dust gathering on the windowsills. What was once a symbol of reunion had become a haunting reminder of what he'd lost. Friends say he couldn't bring himself to enter the house again. Meanwhile, Jess and her parents remained at the Yunta property, surrounded by reminders of the boy who used to run through the fields and laugh in the yard. His little shoes still sat by the back door. The mound of dirt where he had last been seen remained marked by police tape, a silent monument to an unsolved mystery. The community of Yunta, population barely 100, has struggled to move on. Locals describe an eerie quiet that hangs over the area, a sense that something unnatural occurred out there. Some whisper about wild animals, others think of darker explanations that no one dares to voice aloud. To this day, no physical trace of Gus Lamont has ever been recovered. The investigation remains open but stagnant, the file filled with unanswered questions. In a land as vast and merciless as the Outback, a small child can vanish and perhaps never be found. But the mystery of how and why continues to haunt every person who searched and every parent who watches the horizon, waiting for a miracle that may never come. When the official search ended, the investigation entered a quieter but far more complex phase. Detectives from South Australia's major crime branch began re-interviewing every family member and volunteer involved in the first days. The focus shifted from the terrain to the timeline, the critical hours between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. on September 27th, when Gus was last seen. According to statements, Shannon Murray had been caring for both boys that afternoon while Jess and Josie tended sheep on the far paddocks. She described Gus as playful but independent, a child who loved the outdoors and often wandered around the yard. Yet, he was familiar with the property's boundaries. He knew not to go beyond the water tank or the old fence line. Detectives retraced Shannon's steps minute by minute. At around 5 p.m., she said she was inside preparing dinner while Gus played outside. By 5:30, she stepped out to call him in. That 30-minute window became the heart of the investigation, 30 minutes that no one could account for. Police examined the homestead's surroundings again. The soil was hard and dry, difficult for tracking prints, and strong winds had passed through that evening. Still, forensic officers scoured the area for any disturbance in the dirt, any piece of clothing or toy. They found none, It was as if the desert had swallowed the evidence as efficiently as it had the boy. Officers began testing nearby wells, dams, and sinkholes. Ground-penetrating radar was used on sections of the property, but the results were inconclusive. Nothing indicated that Gus had fallen or been buried. Each search ended with the same emptiness, a haunting stillness that gave detectives no direction. As days turned into weeks, online speculation erupted. Some locals believed Gus might have wandered into the bush and succumbed to the elements. Others suspected a passing driver or an opportunistic stranger. But the property was isolated, a dirt road miles from the nearest highway. No vehicles were recorded in the area that evening. Meanwhile, police began looking inward. They interviewed every member of the extended family. Jess, emotional and exhausted, maintained that she had been 10 kilometers away when Gus vanished. Shannon and Josie both gave consistent accounts, describing the moment panic set in and the desperate hours before calling police. Investigators found no contradictions significant enough to suggest deception. No one in the family had a criminal record. Their phones showed no suspicious activity. Polygraph testing was not administered, but officers concluded there was no direct evidence of foul play. Still, they kept the case open, noting too many unanswered questions to close it completely. One lingering mystery was the 3-hour delay before police were notified. In such remote regions, families often search on their own first, but detectives questioned whether those initial hours had erased vital clues. Every minute lost meant tracks could vanish, wildlife could interfere, and the trail could go cold. Behind the headlines, the story of Gus's parents became a painful subplot. Joshua Lamont and Jessica Murray had separated months earlier after ongoing disputes over property and custody. Locals described tension between the two households, though both remained committed to co-parenting. Joshua's renovation project in Jamestown was meant to be a new start, a way to bridge those divides. Friends revealed that Joshua had been preparing to move Jess and the children into the home by the end of the year. He had even painted Gus's bedroom a pale blue and installed a small swing in the yard. To them, his dedication showed not a man running from responsibility, but one trying to rebuild something broken. Police confirmed Joshua's alibi. He was in Jamestown, more than 200 kilometers away, working late. Phone tower data and witnesses placed him at home that evening. He learned of Gus's disappearance when officers arrived at 2 a.m. to deliver the news. He was stunned, one investigator later said. Completely shattered, he couldn't believe it was real. Still, officers reviewed every communication between the parents. Text messages revealed nothing suspicious, only logistical chats about the boys and household matters. The idea that either parent was involved directly seemed unsupported by evidence. The case, in essence, had no suspect and no clear explanation. Attention then turned to geography. The Yunta region is notorious for its treacherous environment. Gullies, caves, and dense scrubland where visibility drops 2 meters. Experts from the Defense Force explained that even adults can lose orientation in minutes. For a child, even a short wander can become fatal. Yet, search teams had combed every plausible route multiple times. A new theory emerged that Gus might have sought shelter somewhere, perhaps inside a hollow or an abandoned structure missed during the first sweeps. Locals revisited old wells, animal burrows, and sheds. Drones with thermal imaging were redeployed for a limited time. Nothing surfaced. The theory faded. The family secret began to draw media attention when reports surfaced that Gus's second grandmother, Josie Murray, was a transgender woman. While this detail had no bearing on the disappearance, online rumors spun it into wild speculation. The family, already in anguish, faced scrutiny that bordered on harassment. Police condemned the gossip as cruel and irrelevant. Commissioner Grant Stevens addressed the media directly, emphasizing compassion over conspiracy. "This family has cooperated fully," he said. "Our focus remains on finding Gus or understanding what happened. This is not about blame. It's about truth." Despite his plea, online forums continued dissecting every rumor. Meanwhile, Joshua withdrew from public life. He stopped visiting Jamestown's local cafe, rarely answered calls, and avoided interviews. Neighbors said his unfinished cottage became a ghost house, tools frozen mid-project, children's toys left untouched. The man who once rebuilt walls now faced a void that couldn't be fixed. Detectives maintained that without new evidence, the case cannot progress. But off the record, many admit something about the timeline still bothers them. How could a child vanish so completely within such a short window? No animal attacks, no abduction vehicles, no trace of clothing, only silence. It's a puzzle that defies every logical explanation. Today, nearly a month after his disappearance, the Gus Lamont case stands as one of South Australia's most haunting mysteries. The official line remains that there is no indication of foul play, but among those who searched, few believe the story ends there. Somewhere between the red dust and the heartbreak lies an answer one that time, and the Outback itself still refuses to reveal. As weeks turned into a month, the Gus Lamont case transformed from an urgent search into a haunting cold trail. With the official operation closed, investigators faced a harsh reality: no leads, no evidence, and a family broken beyond repair. The only thing louder than the Outback whine was the silence that followed every question. Where is Gus? Detectives revisited the timeline one more time, testing every theory, no matter how improbable. The first, that Gus had wandered away and succumbed to the elements. Statistically, it's the most likely outcome for children lost in remote terrain. But what baffled experts was the lack of any trace, not even a shoe, a sock, or an item of clothing, despite over 470 square kilometers of coverage. A second theory suggested an animal attack, perhaps by dingoes or wild dogs. Yet wildlife experts quickly dismissed it. Predatory attacks typically leave tracks, drag marks, or remains. None were found. The soil was undisturbed, and no blood was ever detected. The third and most controversial theory centered on abduction. Could someone have entered the property, taken the boy, and escaped unseen? The homestead sat kilometers off any main road, with limited access routes. There were no reports of unfamiliar vehicles, and no CCTV coverage within a 50-kilometer radius. Still, the possibility lingered, because everything else had failed. Police checked every known offender within a 200-kilometer radius. Background checks, interviews, even DNA sweeps of nearby workers. Nothing connected. No one suspicious had passed through Yunta that week. The area's isolation, once thought a safety net, had become its own nightmare, too remote for witnesses, too vast for answers. Then came the theory of family involvement, whispered in online forums and talkback radio. It's a painful but familiar pattern in missing child cases, suspicion turning inward when evidence runs out. But investigators found no proof and publicly defended the Lamont and Murray families. The scrutiny, however, left scars that would not heal. Local officers described the family as exhausted and traumatized. Shannon, the grandmother who last saw Gus alive, reportedly refused to leave the property, convinced he might still wander home. Jess withdrew from public view, avoiding the media altogether. And Joshua, the father who had been building a new beginning, remained isolated in Jamestown. Friends said he visited the site once, weeks later. He stood by the dirt mound where Gus was last seen, placed a small toy car on the ground, and left without speaking. That moment, quiet and heavy, marked his acceptance of what few dared to say aloud, that his son might never come home. Despite the grief, South Australia police continued low-level inquiries. Detectives analyzed weather data, mapping wind direction and temperature changes to understand how scent-tracking dogs could have lost the trail so quickly. Their conclusion: environmental interference likely erased the boy's trace within hours. Still, questions lingered about the delay in reporting. Why 3 hours? Could early evidence, footprints, a direction of travel, have been lost forever in that window? Officers admitted privately that those first hours were crucial. But there was no way to go back. Time, in the Outback, was as unforgiving as the land itself. Meanwhile, the media storm intensified. National outlets arrived, turning Yunta into a spotlighted ghost town. The phrase "Australia's missing boy" dominated headlines. Reporters camped near the farm's entrance, chasing any update. What had begun as a search for answers turned into a spectacle of speculation. The family's privacy collapsed under the pressure. Online groups spun theories that blended truth with fiction, questioning alibis, fabricating motives, even targeting Josie's gender identity as a distraction. It was cruel, baseless, but impossible to stop. For every day without progress, the narrative grew darker, and empathy faded into accusation. Detectives appealed to the public again. This case is about a 4-year-old boy, Commissioner Grant Stevens said at a press conference, not about rumors or judgment. We will continue to investigate every credible lead, but we need the noise to stop. His plea made headlines, but not silence. By late October, the search headquarters had closed. Volunteers returned home, and the helicopters were grounded. But for those who had searched, the emptiness lingered. One CES volunteer described it simply: "We walked hundreds of kilometers and found nothing. It's like he vanished into the sky." Privately, officers acknowledged that closure might never come. Without a body, without evidence, the Gus Lamont case would remain an open wound, technically active, emotionally frozen. The file sits in Adelaide's Major Crime Division, updated only when new information surfaces. So far, none has. Yet, hope is a strange companion. Every few weeks, calls still reach the local police post. Travelers claiming to see a boy on a distant road, families convinced they recognize his face. Each tip is logged, checked, and inevitably ruled out. Still, those calls remind investigators that someone, somewhere, hasn't stopped looking. The tragedy of Gus Lamont isn't only his disappearance. It's the cruel timing, a family on the verge of reconciliation, a father rebuilding their future, and a little boy days away from a new beginning. The house Joshua renovated remains half-finished, untouched since September. To some, it's a symbol of hope paused, to others, a shrine to what was lost. For Yunta, the case has become a scar on the land. Locals still avoid that property at night. The Outback, once a place of quiet beauty, now feels heavy with memory. Travelers pass by unaware, but those who live there remember the helicopters, the searchlights, and the haunting sound of a mother calling her child's name into the dark. There's talk that one day, the investigation might be reopened, if new technology or evidence appears. Until then, detectives can only keep the file open, the family can only wait, and the Outback keeps its silence. Some mysteries, they say, don't end. They just fade into the wind. And so, the story of Gus Lamont remains unfinished, a missing boy, a devastated family, and a landscape that offers no answers. Maybe the truth lies buried somewhere beneath the red earth. Maybe it was lost to time. But one thing endures: the love of a father who built a home his son never got to see, and the echo of a question that still haunts a nation: what really happened to Gus Lamont? The story of Gus Lamont doesn't end with a police report or a search map. It ends in silence, in the quiet of an unfinished house, in the still air of the Yunta Outback, and in the hearts of those who still wake up hoping for a knock on the door. For Joshua Lamont, that silence is unbearable. He built a home to bring his family together, but now it stands as a monument to what could have been, a place frozen in time, waiting for footsteps that may never return. Every missing child case leaves a mark, but this one feels different. Because somewhere between hope and heartbreak lies a truth we still can't see. Was it the desert, fate, or something darker that took us away? The questions echo louder than the answers, and perhaps that's why this case refuses to fade. If you believe stories like this matter, if you believe the truth deserves to be found, help us keep that light burning. Subscribe to Crime Wisp, share this story, and stay with us as we continue to follow every lead, every clue, every whisper in the wind. Because somewhere out there, the truth about Gus Lamont is still waiting to be uncovered.